Välkommen alla sammen, welcome back to the channel where we use the historical sources to speak about Norse paganism. And today we're speaking about something pretty cool. We're speaking about when Odin actually lived. Because we do have a couple sources actually that can pinpoint for pretty closely as to when he may lived. But as you know, most of our myths aren't actual events that our ancestors believed happened. Our ancestors didn't believe that some human named Odin, he met a giant talking head called Mimir and he cut his eye out to get a drink of the magic mead. No, our myths are symbolic and represent certain things in nature and the universe and with our own souls and spirits. However, there is actually two sources that are fairly reliable that tells that Odin was actually a real person, and it gives us an idea of exactly when he lived. So they're both written by the Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson in the 1200s, and the first one comes in the Prose Edda. And that's in the Gylfangning section. So Odin was said to be the grandson of King Priam, actually, of Troy, like the movie we all know. So that makes Odin Trojan, or specifically Thracian, as it's mentioned in the Prose Edda. Not sure if that's story's true or not, but it's what it says at least. So if it is true, it puts Odin as living around 1100 BC. That's when the Trojan War was said to be over. So over 3,000 years ago, and that is when supposedly he migrated to Scandinavia and started the race of the gods. It's not a super reliable source because Snorri was known to kind of blend myth and real history in his Prose Edda, so we don't really know how accurate that one would be. A far more reliable source comes in Heimskringla, also written by Snorri. So Snorri doesn't really know. He thinks that Odin comes from two separate times, two separate places. Don't know what that means, but anyway, in the story Heimskringla in Ynglinga Saga section, it says that Odin came from Asaland, which we think is somewhere to the north of the Black Sea, would be Ukraine or the Caucasus somewhere. And then, after that, he migrates to Northern Europe from there, again, just like we know from before. So this source in the section Ynglinga Saga is much more reliable. We know this because most of the rest of Heimskringla is believed to be very reliable by historians, because the rest of the book is just sagas of real kings of Sweden and Norway that we know for sure existed and those events actually happened. But so Ynglinga Saga basically tells the story of the Norse kings and their lineage going all the way back to Odin as their ancestor. So here is that lineage that I'm showing up on the screen here. Now, the earliest kings that lived after Odin, the first 10, 20 generations or so, we have no idea when they lived or even if they were real. But a few generations down the line, we start to get an idea, and we know when these guys lived because they are confirmed to be real in other works of literature from medieval times. So the earliest king that we know from this list, that is King Aldis and Helgi. That's because these guys were told about in Beowulf, the famous poem that events dated back to the early 500s. The next ones that we know the actual living dates of is King Halfdan and his son Harald Fairhair, who you all know. That's from the Vikings TV show. So going from this, let's just estimate that each one of these kings was born maybe 30 years after their father. Their father had them when they were about 30 years old. I know, of course, it's going to vary a lot. Some kings would have given birth at a younger age. Some kings would have had kids a lot later in life. It all depends. There's even one story in here, right here, King Aun. Here, in the story at least, he was believed to be 200 years old. That's probably not true, but for sure he had his very last son at very late on in life, so I added a few extra years in here. But other than that, I spaced out just on average 30 years between the kings, because in general that's what we know what was usually the average between kings in the Norse world, 30 years. So look at that. That brings us to Odin, living right around this turn of the millennium. He probably lived at the same time as Jesus, so you can take from that whatever you like. Is this story true that Odin actually lived then? Who knows? This is for sure the most reliable source, at least, that we have about Odin. The thing is that we know for sure that the religion worshipping the Norse gods didn't start until, it's a lot older than it says here, when Odin came to Scandinavia. He would have came to Scandinavia right at the turn of the millennium, and we know that the Norse gods were being worshipped before then. That's listed in Greek sources, Roman sources, and archaeological evidence from quite a long time before that. But if you ask me, I would say that our religion was for sure established by this time when Odin was said to have lived. And it might be very possible that someone at this time migrated to Germany and Scandinavia, and someone who was well-versed in magic, a real person that the people believed to be Odin and the other gods that he gave birth to. We do have some evidence for that, but, that's just my opinion. Take it however you like. Either way, I hope that was an enjoyable video and you learned something, but that's it for today. Vi ses nästa gång.